Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Finally, the WBC has seen fit to give Luis Ortiz and boxing fans alike some closure in relation to the Cuban fighter's failed drug test in September, which ultimately we know curtailed his shot with WBC champion Deontay Wilder. So the sanctioning body, it has now released its final ruling. So I'll go through some of the highlights and get to some thoughts, because this whole situation, it's been a botched job from the outset in my view. Okay, so some background. Luis Ortiz, he is part of the WBC clean boxing program. So this means he has to submit to out-of-competition testing, etc., which is administered by VADA on behalf of the WBC. Okay, so we go back to September 28th. VADA reports to the WBC that Ortiz's A sample from a September 22nd test has tested positive for chlorothiazide and hydrochlorothiazide. The WBC, it published the results quite famously now with zero context, put it out on Twitter. That was through its president, Mauricio Suleiman. Drops the text, failed drug test, essentially branding Ortiz a drugs cheat, and walks away, watches the world burn. Team Ortiz, they have to scramble and claim the result was as a result of some blood pressure medicine that Ortiz was prescribed, and prescribed legally, they claimed. On October 4th, and this next bit, we never got the half of it at the time. Most of this is news to me now, or officially the WBC confirming what it did back then. Team Ortiz's team came out with some of this, but we had to take it at face value from them. So October 4th, the WBC Board of Governors ruled Ortiz had committed 3 violations of the clean boxing program's protocol. And all of these were essentially around the failure to disclose at various points that he was taking this blood pressure medicine. And if he had have disclosed the medication, he could have been available, or he could have been considered for a temporary use exemption, so otherwise known as a TUE, something you can use for a temporary period for a specific purpose. So he was fined $25,000 and ordered to undertake a complete physical examination protocol that the WBC Medical Advisory Committee designed, and it would be performed by a licensed physician that the WBC pre-approved. The WBC also instructed that VADA design a specific random testing protocol for Ortiz for at least 6 months, or at least up until the date of his next fight, whichever was sooner or longer. The WBC also withdrew, and this is what we already knew, the previously issued sanction for a scheduled bout against WBC heavyweight champion Deontay Wilder. And a lot of that, so I mentioned we didn't know that. It's only now that they're actually coming back in hindsight. Okay, so final ruling. Ortiz, he's been through a battery of tests ordered and arranged by the WBC Medical Advisory Chairman, Dr. Paul Wallace. So this includes, and there's quite a mouthful here, magnetic resonance angiogram, which is known as an MRA, of his brain, magnetic resonance imaging, an MRI, of his brain without contrast, and electrocardiogram, an EKG, exercise stress echocardiogram provided both myocardial perfusion and echocardiographic structural assessment. That's a mouthful and a half. Formal neurocognitive testing with a notation of any deterioration from the baseline first assessment. Also, and so he really went through the ringer here, blood work including a complete blood count and complete metabolic panel, which includes hepatic tests, blood urea nitrogen, creatine and glucose, an ophthalmologic eye exam with pupil dilation, and retinal examination. Whew, he went through a lot there. The WBC says Dr. Wallace reviewed the results of all medical examinations, each one of which were completely normal and revealed no ongoing adverse health condition whatsoever. Dr. Wallace also examined Mr. Ortiz's medical history and confirmed the medical justification for Mr. Ortiz to ingest a blood pressure medication, which eventually resulted in Mr. Ortiz's adverse finding. The WBC Board of Governors hereby ratifies the prior rulings finding that Mr. Ortiz's failure to disclose his ingestion of a prescribed high blood pressure medication constitutes a violation of the WBC CBP protocol and confirms the $25,000 US fine. You notice how they always find a way to keep the fines and keep the money from this sort of thing? So in light of the information set forth above, however, the WBC concludes that the evidence available to the WBC supports a finding that Mr. Ortiz's ingestion of high blood pressure medication was directed to the treatment of an ongoing medical condition. Therefore, Mr. Ortiz will continue to be tested based on a specifically designed testing protocol. As of the date of this ruling, Mr. Ortiz is available to compete in WBC sanctioned events and shall be confirmed in the WBC ratings in a position consistent with the recommendation of the WBC Ratings Committee. So the upshot of all that is he's back. The WBC has cleared him and they've said he was allowed to take the medication. There was a valid reason to take it. So after nearly 2 months of zero information, the WBC has come out with something. I mean, until now, there's been zero transparency about this whole thing, and it's all been very murky. I mean, the fact that, and you might notice this, it seems to be after the fact we have all these reasons and justifications. It's almost like the offence gets mitigated down the line, and it seems to be, oh yeah, it's fine now. But they were so willing to go out public at the beginning and say, well, he was guilty from the outset. He's failed the drug test. They didn't put anything with that. Ruined his reputation. Now they've done this about face. They've come back full circle and said, hang on, wait, no, we've actually done these tests and we've decided, well, actually, he was allowed to take that medication. And doesn't that just seem bizarre? It's always with these things, the pieces of the puzzle get filled in well after the fact, and fans are expected to take it all at face value. So in spite of three stated violations of the clean boxing program, Ortiz has been cleared as a drugs cheat. So, and just to go back and rake the coals of this whole thing again, I've previously mentioned before, why did the WBC set about torching Ortiz's reputation in public before it had fully investigated the matter? Why did it do that? Those initial tweets from Mauricio Suleiman destroyed Luis Ortiz's credibility, and it's not something he's actually really recovered from. He might be able to shout from the rooftops now that he's clean and everything was above board, but the damage was done. Many fans will still think that he's a drugs cheat. The stank of it will never leave him. And remember, he did have a failed test from 2014 after the Latif Kyoto fight. That was a WBA sanctioned event. I mean, had the WBC, through its president Mauricio Suleiman, who actually, did the initial tweets, had he framed things differently, some of this could have at least been viewed in a slightly different light. Maybe he wouldn't have been put out to basically be hung, drawn and quartered. Imagine if Suleiman had have come out with something along the lines of, well, the WBC is working with Ortiz and his team over a paperwork issue related to a temporary use exemption. It certainly would have put some of this in a slightly different light, and the context would have helped here. But what they did, they got the test, broadcast it, no investigation, then investigated, and now they've come back round and they've said, oh, actually, no, he's fine. But remember, the WBA has banned the guy on the strength of the failed test. So it's not like there hasn't been any fallout. So besides the reputation being destroyed and now being, oh yeah, actually you're fine. But the WBA has banned him for a whole year. They've already stated they feel that they need to take a firm line with this stuff. And can you really blame them? At the end of the day, he still failed the test. He didn't do the paperwork, and I'll come to that in a moment. So the WBC, it really needs to look at how it releases such information, because that's actually quite important. I mean, especially given in this case, it hadn't even started investigating the matter. The way it portrayed it, with the limited information it had, it portrayed Ortiz as a drugs cheat. By default, he was guilty. Failed the test, no other information. People join the dot and go, well, he's guilty. Complete 180 now. And he can box on as long as he clears a few testing procedures. So this is very untidy by the WBC. I mean, a lot of people do speculate it's because they didn't want him to fight Deontay Wilder. I'm not really buying that. But it kind of seems like, well, shouldn't these guys who do this for a living have a well-stated procedure and process for dealing with this sort of thing before hanging people out to dry in the media? It really is quite quizzical. And the upshot of the whole thing was, well, Ortiz, he might be cleared now, but he missed out on any title shots that he was in line for. Remember, he was going to fight Wilder. And also, he was the mandatory to Anthony Joshua in the WBA. So he's got neither now. But he can't go blaming anyone else but himself for this entire situation. The WBC might have handled the whole thing poorly, but at the end of the day, Luis Ortiz and his people, they didn't do the paperwork. If this was legitimate, they didn't do the paperwork that they should have done, and they should have done the paperwork. And there will be those out there who think, well, he was doping. And this whole thing, they won't believe it one iota. And many people would say, well, the punishment meted out to Luis Ortiz is probably not harsh enough. But given what's happened, I feel somewhat sympathetic to Luis Ortiz in terms of the WBC and the way that they treated him in the process of this. But at the end of the day, I can't resolve from the fact that he missed the paperwork, didn't do it, and they must have known. I mean, he was at the emergency department for an issue related to his health that was so serious that he needed blood pressure medicine. Raises the whole thing, well, should he be fighting at all? But then we've got these tests that the WBC did and basically saying he's as healthy as a horse and he can box on. But that being the case, why did he need the medication in the first place? Wouldn't we hear about some sort of underlying issue as a result of the tests? But apparently not. So this whole thing, it raises, I mean, I'm not very big on the WBC and the way it's handled it, but in a way, there's more questions as a result of the information we've got as well. And Ortiz, what is he, 38 going on about 60 from what people say? He's probably done and dusted on a title front shot as well. And who will want to jump on the ring now? How long will it take till he ends up getting another mandatory position? It's not happening in the WBA anytime soon, and there's now people ahead of him in the WBC. It's a mess. He's been cleared, probably with a little bit of an asterisk next to it, but he can continue fighting. We'll have to see what the other sanctioning bodies do, but the WBA has already said, well, the punishment, the 12-month ban, it will stick. So we've got this crazy situation where two sanctioning bodies have gone the complete opposite. Strange indeed. What do you make of it all? It's a bit weird to me, and the WBC hasn't done right by him, but then again, he didn't do right by himself. Drop a comment, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.